It was about 3 in the morning and I was on my way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers there with me. She told me to text her when I got there so that she could let me inside. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of his car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare. Let me point out that it's completely pouring outside. I was really confused as to why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager to let me inside. Seconds later, I noticed her at the door opening it for me. Upon walking up to her, I say my usual good morning. I was stopped mid-sentence by her rushing me inside and saying, "Did you see that guy outside?" I told her yes, and she proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. My manager then told me that she's going to check the security tapes just to make sure that everything during the period that the restaurant was closed was okay. Minutes later, my manager called me into her office for whatever reason. She told me to look at the screen and it showed that the same man was standing outside. The time was 12:47. She then fast-forwarded the tape to reveal that the man had been standing outside the entire time up until now, and at this point it's about 3:50 a.m. I ran to the front lobby and I noticed him still standing over by his car. I figured or was hoping that he was probably just on something and he was waiting for us to open so that maybe he could get breakfast. I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order, until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure right outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled that we were closed and that he would have to come back later. That didn't seem to faze him as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away, figuring that he was just being an asshole, when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door broken and the man beginning to step inside. I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door, and we did just that. We booked it to our cars and both called the cops. They arrived in about 15 minutes and came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. They said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again.
It was my first Halloween living in my own house away from my parents. I live in a small corner house with a basement but no upstairs, a house my parents paid half for. It was 11 o'clock at night. I was sitting in the living room watching scary Halloween movies when I found myself getting up to answer a knock at the door. But then I stopped and thought, who could be at the door at 11 p.m.? Surely there were no more trick-or-treaters out. I had a pretty good feeling it was a late-night Halloween ding-dong-ditcher, so I gave it a second, then I shot a glance to the porch through the window. They were gone already. Yup, ding-dong-ditchers. I sat back down, not thinking twice about it, and again, knocking at the front door. "Get lost," I yelled. I was not in the mood for punky kids. They ignored my demands and started pounding now, not just knocking. I was pissed now. I leaped up and swung the door open. No one was there once again. I slipped on my shoes and headed outside to begin searching the bushes for the kids, but there was nobody in sight. Not in the bushes, not behind my car, not across the street. I was done answering. I didn't want to feed into their fun anymore, so I went back inside, double-locked the door, and went to my bedroom, also locking that door, just to feel safer, I guess. Even over the TV, I could still hear the stupid kids pounding on my front door repeatedly. I was so close to calling the cops to get them away, but that would undoubtedly lead to my house being egged or teepeed. The pounding continued for an uncomfortably long time, more than half an hour. I thought these kids must be filming something for YouTube and were desperate for a reaction, but I wasn't going to give it to them. At some point I dozed off with the TV on, only to wake up to the knocking again. I looked at the clock. It was 2 in the fucking morning. How could those kids still be at it, I thought. I turned the TV off and sat up with my ears open. For a few moments, my heart completely stopped as I realized the knocking was not at my front door, but rather at my bedroom door. I jumped out of bed, looking around my room like a madman for something to use as a weapon. They knew I was awake now. They were trying the doorknob, trying to bust down the door. These weren't any kids. By some miracle, I came up with an idea. It was a long shot, but it was all I could think of. I turned on the receiver to my speaker system, plugged in my iPhone, brought up the YouTube app, typed in 45 gunshot sound effect, turned on the volume, and pressed play. The sound of a gunshot echoed out of the speakers. It sounded real enough. I paused the video after the first shot and yelled, "That was a warning shot. Leave now or I won't hesitate to shoot you in the head." And it worked. I heard 2 pairs of footsteps stomping over my wood floors and out the front door. I gave it a moment before opening my bedroom door and peeking outside. They were gone, but the front door was left wide open. I quickly shut it, called the police, and that's where my story ended.
To add a bit of backstory, I was an active duty Marine a year prior to this story happening. Granted, we're trained to take lives and deploy to other countries to fight. Sad to say that I never got the opportunity to deploy, but if I wasn't trained as a Marine, I honestly think I wouldn't be here telling this story. Now, onto the story. This story took place last year on a cool summer night here in Arizona. I just got off from work and took a coworker home from a late night dinner after the shift. I passed by a gas station after I dropped her off. I was working 2 jobs at the time, so it was already late, around 2 a.m. I knew an energy drink would help me wake up tomorrow morning for my next job. So I was slowly pulling into this empty gas station. I noticed no other cars anywhere. That's when something caught my eye as I was pulling up in front of the entrance. There was a shadowy figure that suddenly pulled up along one of the walls of the gas station and kept creeping along the walls, getting closer as I pulled up. There was some sort of shadowy figure that suddenly pulled up along one of the walls of the gas station. It crept along the walls, getting closer as I pulled up and turned off my car. But at the time I couldn't care less because I was tired and I figured he was just a drunk and about to ask for change or something like that. I saw the outline of his face as he pulled away from the shadows. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could say anything, I cut him off and said, "Hey, I'll be right back, sir." He just kinda stood there and stared at me as I walked into the gas station. I wasn't even thinking about him because I was tired and just wanted to go home. I swooped up my favorite energy drink and walked up to the cashier. I paid for my drink in a matter of a minute as the cashier wasn't really in any mood to make any small talk. I pushed the entrance door open and I noticed that the man was no longer there. I was looking around for the man as I approached my car to only see him coming from the dark corner again. But something seemed off about him this time. I didn't care to stick around to see what was off about him and went to open my car door. Then I heard rapid footsteps approach from behind me. I turned around as fast as possible to make eye contact with him. He was just staring at me less than an arm's reach away. Every option suddenly ran through my head, screaming at me to just get in the damn car and slam the door. But he was already too close for me to try anything without him trying to do something. So I wanted to try and create a peaceful conversation as a desperate attempt to try to get this creep away from me. I said, "Oh, hey, it's you again. Is there something I can do for you?" His whisper had a scratchy tone to it as he said, "Got any change?" I was actually thrilled. I was happy because I could just give this creep some money as a peaceful resolution. I said, "Sure do. Hold on, I'll dig it out for you." By the time I grabbed a fistful of change as I leaned into my car, I heard the passenger door behind me open and then I felt a handful of my hair get pulled into my driver's seat. My hair got yanked back really hard as he whispered, "You fucking scream or yell and I'll fucking kill you." Then I felt a knife slowly glide over my throat. He then whispered, "Understand." I carefully nodded up and down. He then replied, Now, we're going to New Mexico. Don't do anything stupid or I'll cover your car's interior with your blood. At the time, I was thinking, fuck, this can't be fucking real. So I had to think and relax. That's one thing my commanding officer said in the Corps. The key to victory is a clear conscience and a cool head. So I asked him, okay, how are we doing this? You just gonna give me directions? I then felt his grip on my hair loosen. Good, smart kid. I hate when they beg me to let them go. Now use your GPS or whatever. His knife was still gently pressed up against 70% or so of my throat. So I told him I was slowly going to reach into my glove compartment for my GPS. Then I asked him where in New Mexico we were going. He laughed and told me to just shut up and drive. Why was he laughing now? This guy was a complete psycho. I was there driving and praying in my head for a chance to open where I would be able to fight back. I could tell that his knife was starting to get loose around my neck for every 5 minutes or so that I drove. The knife at the start of this drive was at about 70%, but now it was at around 50%. I had to make a right at the intersection. Finally, I saw an opportunity. I saw this Ford Ranger pickup truck coming down the road I was supposed to join on. In my head, I asked myself, do you really want to die a coward? Then, as I saw the Ford Ranger approach at a rapid rate, I pressed all the way down on the gas pedal. Then, boom. All I remember from all the commotion is the guy leaning back as I slid my hand under his wrist of the hand that was carrying the knife and pinned it against the steering wheel of my car. I can hear the horn blaring, attracting more attention. He let go of the knife and ran out of the car as the intersection made itself known to me again as my surroundings were no longer blurry. I wanted to run after him, but the driver of the Ford Ranger grabbed me and said, "Hey, what the hell happened? Do you have insurance?" I was trying to push through the guy to catch that fucking coward, but the only words that escaped my mouth were, "Don't let him get away!" That's all I was yelling as I saw the dark silhouette of the man disappearing into the darkness. I told the police everything when they arrived. I did everything you're supposed to, but nothing really ever came of it. And they didn't see anyone matching my description of the man. I now carry my gun on me and a few knives, so I will never be the victim of something like this again.
Years ago when I was in 2nd grade, I'm 22 now, my parents one morning finally felt confident in allowing me to stay home from school by myself and stay home without a babysitter until they came home. That morning my father gave me a house key, showed me the emergency numbers in the yellow book, and gave me instructions on what to do if stupid things happen like the house catching on fire. After school that day I came home, put the key in the door and walked into my house. I felt free. And I felt privileged that I was finally a big boy, and that I could now be on my own at home. Needless to say, I kinda got caught up in the moment, and ate tons of ice cream while watching Terminator on VHS, since my parents would never let us watch anything other than PG-13. Around 5 that day, I heard the doorbell ring. My dad told me to never answer the door by myself, even if they were home. I walked to our family room where I could get a good view of who was out there. Maybe my dad was just getting a package or something. He did always enjoy ordering things online. I saw a middle-aged man standing in a dark blue jacket that I've never seen before. He rang the doorbell again, and I expected him to leave after no one answered. After a third ring, I saw him walk down the steps and I assumed he was leaving. I went back to watching Terminator when I noticed something outside my kitchen window. The man was in our backyard for some odd reason. I felt scared for my life since some stranger was on my property. I ran under the kitchen table and grabbed the cordless phone from the counter and proceeded to call my dad's work number. My dad answered, and I exclaimed how a strange man was in the backyard and was now proceeding to try and open the sliding door. My dad told me to stay where I was and to call the neighbors. He would call 911. I told my dad I loved him, and he said he would call me immediately after he called 911. Before I could call my neighbor, the man was able to somehow open our family room window. I feared for my life and ran to the bathroom and locked the door and called our neighbors. After 30 seconds, I hear my neighbor running through our house, shouting my name to see if I was okay. She said that she saw no one in the house, and we stayed in the bathroom until the police arrived. The police conducted their investigation and told us that they found some fingerprints that matched a recently released convict who was previously in jail for breaking into homes. After that day, my parents did not leave me alone without a babysitter until I went to high school.
Back in 2008, Cloverfield was one of the biggest movies of the year, and I desperately wanted to see it. Most of my friends had already gone to see it, which upset me given that I didn't want to be seen going to the movie theater alone. However, I didn't have work or school on Thursdays, so on Wednesday night, I figured I could get away with going alone to one of the small theaters nearby with a screening of the film at 9:30, since I knew it would be quiet. Well, I showed up, bought a ticket, and immediately realized the entire building was dead. I entered the theater, and much to my surprise, there was not a single person in there. There were 2 large sections of seats in the theater. I sat in the bottom row of the upper section, which was seated just behind a tiny wall. During the quiet parts of the movie, which were very few, I kept thinking that I was hearing something coming from behind me. It was almost like I was hearing a voice. Is someone there? Nothing. I felt like the sounds were just getting louder and closer, but I kept turning around and didn't see anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. Eventually, the sounds became so loud that it was evident it was a crazed whispering. I was about to nope the fuck out of there, but when I got up and took one last look behind me, a figure popped up quickly from behind the seats just 2 rows up from me, arms flat to their sides and just facing me like a stiff statue. I ran like there was no tomorrow back to the lobby, where I saw nobody, not a single employee. I kept running to the car, took a few seconds to catch my breath once inside, and drove back home. I tried calling the theater that same night. I never got anyone to answer. I didn't bother the next day, and I just tried to let it go. It still freaks me out beyond imagination to this day.
I hike very frequently and was on a trail and about 8 miles from the nearest gravel road. It was just me and my dog. Just to note, I've hiked these trails frequently and have only seen other people during mushroom hunting season and only near where the parking patches are, and this was in January, so it was freezing cold and there were no mushrooms. I'd been going at it for almost 2 hours when I stumbled upon a pile of bones. Large bones, bigger than human, maybe a cow, maybe buffalo, maybe horse. They were completely clean and sun-bleached. No flesh, no fur. I find deer remains all the time. They always have fur on their legs. This means someone or something cleaned them, or their old bones. The scary part is that they were neatly arranged into a pyramid shape, all leaning on each other like a teepee. I was just on this trail the week before and there had been no bones. There had also not been a giant dead animal, and there wouldn't have been any rotting happening because it was 20 Fahrenheit. I stared at them for a while, then turned around and spotted more peculiarities. The tree behind me had several bones strung up and hung in the tree by the trail marks. They swayed in the wind and kinda clunked gently like morbid wind chimes. So this means it had to have been somebody and not some weird raccoons or something. I start to panic because does this mean that somebody's watching me? Am I being warned or stalked? I always go on a select few trails and this is one of my most frequented, and never have I seen someone else out this far. The hairs on my neck stand up because I'm sure I'm in the crosshairs of some serial killer who's been stalking me. I walk with my headphones in. He could have followed me for weeks and I wouldn't have known. My dog freezes and points towards a different large tree 10 yards away. The hair of her scruff raises and she starts to growl and creep toward the tree. I'm panicking. I have nothing other than my hiking stick. My dog barks once. She's 40 pounds, by the way. She's not an attack dog. And she starts sprinting towards the tree. I instinctively crouch down. She reaches the tree and a turkey takes off from the other side, gobbling as it flies away. I can still feel my pulse in my eyes as I watch it fly away. I sigh, pet my dog, and check to make sure I didn't shit myself. I snap a few pictures of the weird bones and make my way back. I still hike through there, and the bones are still there untouched. No way am I touching them. No idea where they came from. Probably some weird old coot trying to scare people. It definitely worked on me.
When I was just a little boy, I had an imaginary friend. Well, at least I thought he was an imaginary friend. Today, I'm not so sure. I would see him from time to time around my house. He was a man and he lurked in the shadows. He was completely black from head to toe and his skin was charred and pockmarked, like a burnt match. I couldn't make out his face or any other features. All I could see were his red eyes. He had the most terrifying red eyes I've ever seen. And even now, when I think of them, it gives me the chills. He appeared at random and without any warning. I would be playing with my toys and all of a sudden he would be there. He never made a sound. He never said a word. He never did anything except stand there staring at me and smiling. Then he would vanish as quietly as suddenly as he had come. As time went by, I got accustomed to his presence. It got to the point where he would just appear and I would just glance at him, then go back to playing with my toys. I could always feel his eyes as he was just standing ever so close and ever so far away at the same time. My family knew about him, but they never saw him themselves. My mother and father thought it was cute that I had an imaginary friend, but when I described him to them, they got a little creeped out. My sister was the only one who believed me. She's the only one who believed he was real, and she said it scared her. One time, I had just finished going to the bathroom and I started washing my hands. I was standing on a little stool so I could reach the sink. All of a sudden, I saw the man out of the corner of my eye. He was walking up the stairs. I called my sister and told her the man was here. She came running over, but just when I was about to point out the man, he walked backwards down the stairs until he was out of sight. When she left, he came creeping back up the stairs. I gave up trying to show him to people because he clearly did not want to be seen. Eventually, my parents moved out the house. I remember seeing the man with the red eyes watching us as we were moving and the van pulled away. He didn't follow us, and I didn't see him again after that. I dismissed him as a figment of my childish imagination. Years passed and I forgot about him. Then, one night, when I was 16 years old, I was walking upstairs to my bedroom. It was after midnight. As I was walking down the hallway, something emerged from one of the other bedrooms. It stepped out into the light and I realized, to my horror, that it was the man with red eyes. I stopped in my tracks and I froze. My heart was in my throat. He just stood there staring at me. The red eyes burned bright and he flashed me a malicious smile. Then, still staring at me, he slowly walked across the hallway into my bedroom. If this was a movie, perhaps I would have chased him down and forced him to tell me who or what he was. Perhaps it would have ended in me fighting to the death, but this wasn't a movie. It was real life, and I did neither of those things. I simply turned around, ran back down the stairs, and fled from my house. I sat on the curb outside, shivering and shaking until dawn arrived. I haven't seen him again since then.
My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community in Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After around 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets, with the van following every move. She started sprinting, and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the back door. The dog in the house started barking at her, but still, no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. She could hear that the van had parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen earlier that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station.
I've never been a person to think that skinwalkers are real until 1 week ago. Last week I went camping with my mom and we were in Strawberry, Arizona. We were going to be camping for the weekend starting Friday night to Sunday afternoon. We arrived at about 6 o'clock and it was already dark. My mom started a small fire and we got working on putting up our tents. We got that done about 30 minutes later. We had our dinner, some s'mores, and went to bed. I woke up at 10 as I needed to go pee, so I got out a flashlight and went out to pee. A few moments later, I started walking back to my tent and I heard something scratching on what I assumed was wood. I stopped and I looked around. There was nothing there. I jogged back to my tent and got in. Within a few moments after I got into my tent, I heard the scratching again. It was closer now, way closer. After a minute or two, it went away. I fell asleep 15 minutes later. I was awoken to a loud screech. It sounded like it was within 20 feet of us. I didn't dare go out there with whatever that thing was. I was still half asleep and I turned on my flashlight in the tent and pointed it to the walls of the tent. Big mistake. It was attracted to my light and walked to it. I saw its silhouette come into view. It was a large figure. Everything about it seemed human at first. Then I noticed the fingers. They had what looked like to be claws instead. The height of it was larger than any person I had ever seen. Its legs were not human-like either. They looked like they belonged to a goat. It started scratching on my tent, making holes in it. I saw a part of the tall figure. Its legs were, as I described before, goat-like. I was paralyzed. The thing scratched my leg while trying to get into my tent and I kicked it. To my surprise, it didn't scratch me again whenever I did that. Then the creature started to shrink. This is the best way I can describe it. And it was what appeared to be a wolf, and it got on its back legs and ran. I shit you not, it ran on its back legs. I got a first aid kit out of my bag and wrapped my leg. The cut wasn't too deep, but it was bleeding pretty good. I got out of my tent and went into my mom's tent. She was awake and as frightened as I was. Within 15 minutes, everything was in the car and we got out of there. It was probably 3 in the morning whenever this happened and we got home at about 5 in the morning. Let's just say I'm not going camping again for a while.
A little backstory first. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was around 8 months pregnant, and so it was very noticeable. It was mid-December, and I was doing a little Christmas shopping at the mall at around 9 PM. I finished up my shopping and headed out of the mall towards my truck. There's a road that goes around the mall, and the parking is on the other side of this road. Therefore, you have to cross the road to get to the parking area. As I'm leaving the store, I happen to notice a man standing in the middle of the road. He looked in my direction and made eye contact. I looked away and kept going. At this time, there are 2 men who walk straight past him and walk into the mall. He never looks at them or says anything to them. He just keeps his eyes on me. I noticed that he started to walk in my direction, but I just keep on strolling towards my vehicle. Then I hear Excuse me, can you help me? Being Southern has its downfalls, and one of those is having it ingrained in you to be polite. I simply just asked him, "What do you need?" He looked around for a moment and said, "Could you help me start my car? I think my battery is dead." Now, I may be Southern, but I'm not that polite, nor am I stupid. Please remember that I am very much pregnant and alone in a dark parking lot. If he was really having car trouble, is it likely that he would have asked a pregnant woman to help rather than those two men who walked straight past him? Doubtful. At this point, I know it's time to go, so I just say, "Sorry, I can't help," and I keep on walking, a little faster this time. I still see him out of the corner of my eye, following me. I have my keys out, and I'm ready to go as soon as I get to my truck. He's still coming. "You really aren't gonna help me? I just need a jump." Again, I say, "No, sorry." I finally get to the truck, unlock it, and jump in. He's practically running towards me now. I lock the doors, and I try to get the key into the ignition, but I was shaking so much at that very moment that the damn key would not fit in. He gets to the truck and hits my window, saying, "I just need your help for a minute." Now I'm starting to get angry, and I yell, "No, get the hell away from me." He grabs the door handle and tries to open my door and screams, "Just open it." Here is where I lost my cool and made a split-second decision. I have my concealed carry license, because there have been other reasons I've needed protection that I won't go into here. However, I did have my .38 Special in my console that I do know how to use. When he tried to open my door, my only thought was to protect my unborn child and myself. I rolled the window down, grabbed my .38 and pointed it right in his face and said, "I'm not gonna tell you again. Get the fuck away from me." He stood there for a moment, in shock, I'm sure. In that moment, time stopped. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew that I was prepared to use my gun if he made a move towards me. He didn't say a word. He just turned and ran. I know I should have gotten the hell out of Dodge right then and there, but in that moment, I couldn't. All I could do was just sit there, in shock. I was terrified of not only what he might have done to me had I not sensed something was off, but also that I had just threatened to kill someone. Not a situation I ever want to be in again. However, should it happen, I still have that .38, and it's loaded and ready to go.
I used to work at Domino's, and I would often run into weird or freaky people while delivering. This is one of those experiences. I came to this weird worn-out house in horrible condition. The grass was tall, and it had a bunch of trash scattered throughout it. It also had a couple of windows that were boarded up. It looked completely abandoned, but the lights were on through some of the windows. I was a bit scared to go in, so I knocked on the door, and an old bald man with a mustache and glasses opened it. As he did, a putrid odor that smelled like something had died there hit me, and he began staring at me very intensely. He said,
"Hello."
in a very monotone way. I said hi as happily as I could act. As I handed him the pizzas, he said,
"Thank you for the pizzas."
He ordered 4 pies, and that kind of concerned me because it didn't sound like there was a party. I just replied with, "You're very welcome," with a fake smile. I avoided eye contact because I was very scared by this point. That's when I heard a couple of screams from another room. It sounded like children. I asked, "Who was that?" And he just answered with a straight face,
What are you talking about? I heard nothing.
I knew I heard something, but I just decided to ignore it. I gave him the pizzas and he gave me the money, and all of a sudden, he just started touching my hair. He said,
Your hair's so soft and long and thick. It's just a vine.
This scared me, and I pushed his hand off of me and ran back towards my car and drove away. I knew I should have called the cops, but what if those kids were just his grandkids and they were playing, and those screams were playful? Maybe he just got pizza for them. I really don't know, but I know something was off about him. I've been told that I'm a great judge of character. I hope those kids were okay. I honestly just don't want to know what happened.
In my early days after graduating college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to rent an apartment with someone else who I'd never met before. He'd become my roommate, and his name was Randall. At first, he seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much, but he had a heavy Spanish accent. The room I'd be getting was already furnished, and that was one of the appealing factors to this apartment. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in the corner, a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand in another corner of the room. There were a bunch of stuffed animals sitting on the dresser though, which I found a bit odd. Most notably a big teddy bear facing the bed. When I asked Randall about the stuffed animals, he gave a really loud laugh and said his room had the same thing. He recommended I leave them be as to show respect to the landlord. I didn't really talk to Randall much that first day other than that. I spent most of my time unpacking my clothes and supplies and setting up my TV. When I was laying in the bed watching TV that night, I thought I heard something. It was a very brief noise, but it was definitely audible, and it sounded like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise and continued my show. The next day, Randall wasn't home all day. I didn't know if or where he worked, but I just assumed he was at work. That night, when I was in my room watching TV, I heard the front door open, and Randall walked through the hall to his room before shutting the door. A little later, I was getting changed into my pajamas when I heard the same sound from the night before. This time without the TV noise in the background, so I heard it much clearer. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what or where. It still didn't seem like a big deal, so I got into my bed and started reading my current book at the time, then went to sleep. The next day, I saw Randall when I came home after work, and he asked me what book I was reading. At first I didn't get the question, but then he said he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him in silence and confusion. I asked him how he knew I was reading a book, and he said in his heavy Spanish accent that he had to go into my room just to take something out that he left in there, and that's when he noticed the book. I asked him nicely not to go into my room anymore. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lock on the door, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home. That night, when I grabbed my book from under my bed, I stopped and wondered, how would he see my book if I had it under my bed? Thinking about this now creeped me out, and I was in no mood to read anymore. I looked around the room as I thought to myself, then I noticed that big teddy bear on the dresser again. How it was angled so perfectly to face me in the bed. Then I had a thought, a scary thought. I stood up and walked over to the bear, grabbed it, and looked closely into its eyes. I felt my heart skip a beat when I realized there was a camera in one of the eye holes. I threw the thing into the corner of the room and went to Randall's door and tried opening it. His door apparently had a lock because it wouldn't open, but I knew he was in there. I pounded on the door screaming his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light sneaking in through the bottom of the door go dark, as I assumed he turned off the light. I went back to my room and called the landlord. I explained everything and told him I'm leaving right now, and I had a valid reason to void the contract. I packed the little amount of things I brought into my car and left that same night, never looking back. The landlord surprisingly never even came to me to collect the money for those few days I was there. Ever since that night, I have a phobia of stuffed bears. Like, I always have to turn them away so that they're not facing me.
This was about 6 months ago in the summer, southern hemisphere here. I tend to order a fair bit of pizza since hunger is a thing, and pizza is pretty much my only option for delivery since I don't drive. Now, I'm the kind of girl who doesn't wear pants if I don't have to. Oh, the weather's about 25 degrees, no pants for me. I have one pair of shorts that I love to wear, but only around the house, so obviously I put those on as I'm expecting a pizza delivery and can't exactly open the door pantless. I open the door, accept the pizza, and begin eating my dinner by the television. Not too long into my meal, I get a message on my phone. I've deleted the messages, of course, but in the first message, the sender calls me by name, which is strange as I prefer my nickname, and asks if I'm home alone often with a winky face. Okay, way creepy. Who is this person? Between me asking who on earth they are and how they got my number, probably a mistake on my part, they begin to describe exactly what I was wearing, and I get a horrible sinking feeling. This person has my number, my name, and how I'm dressed. I realize that the only way they could know this is if they were the guy who delivered my pizza, as I had to use my name and number to order. And if that's the case, this person knows where I live too. I put the number into Google and check the first few results. They're a local, and I've actually seen this person around on one of the buy, swap, sell pages on Facebook. Realizing they were in my town was the worst part, and they were literally in a good position to stalk, harass, or continue to be creepy as hell. I ended up drawing all the blinds, crawling into bed, and pretty much making myself into a blanket burrito, staying as still as I could for a few hours. I was genuinely scared out of my wits. Thankfully, I've yet to hear from this person again, after threatening police action.
A month ago, my girlfriend and I got engaged. We moved into a new apartment and began living together. It was the first time either of us had shared an apartment, so it was a new experience for the both of us. We were deeply in love. I knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I thought she felt the same about me. Everything went well until 2 weeks ago, when I noticed that my girlfriend was acting very strange. She had become so attached to me that it felt like she couldn't stand being away from me for more than a moment. One evening, she said to me, "Darling, when you're not at home, I still feel you're near me." I didn't attach much importance to these words. I thought she was just being affectionate. However, a few days later, she told me something else. "Whenever you're at work," she said, "I often hear your voice, as if you were calling my name." This began to happen more and more as the days went by, and I started to get a little worried about her. One day, when I arrived home from work, I found her sitting silently at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall with a glazed look in her eyes. I grabbed a chair, sat down beside her, and asked her what was the matter. "I think there's something wrong with me," she said. "Why would you think that?" I asked. "I saw you today," she said. "You walked from the kitchen into the bedroom and then you stood back to me, staring out the window." "But I was at work all day," I said. "I know," she replied with a sigh. That's when I really began to worry. I suspected that my girlfriend was losing her mind and starting to have hallucinations. Over the next few days, she kept telling me that she saw me in the apartment when I was at work. She could even describe exactly what I was wearing. My girlfriend was also acting more and more strange. She was getting more and more quiet, and she was terrified of being left alone. Sometimes she would just sit there silently staring at me. Last night, my girlfriend was very tired and decided to go to bed early. I held her hand and sat on the edge of the bed as she was falling asleep. Just before she nodded off, she said, "You're not here." "Honey, I'm right here," I replied. "Don't worry, everything is fine." "No, you're not here," she said. "You're in the kitchen." Just then, I heard a dull noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a chair scraping across the linoleum. Then, I heard the sound of footsteps walking down the hallway. Fear gripped my heart and I didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, the handle on the bedroom door began to turn, and the door slowly began to open. Maybe it's just a draft, I thought as my eyes grew wide with fear. But it wasn't a draft. The door swung open, and I saw a man standing there in the doorway. It was me. It's difficult to describe exactly what I saw. It was me, but at the same time it wasn't me. It was as if I was staring at myself in a mirror, but the other me had cold, lifeless eyes. The other me looked at me for a moment and then turned and left, shutting the door behind him. It took me a moment to recover from the shock, and then I sprang off the bed and ran after him. The hallway was empty. I checked the kitchen, then the bathroom, but he was nowhere to be found. The other me simply vanished. It was terrifying. And then, as I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what had just happened, trying to calm myself down and convince myself that it was just a hallucination, I heard a faint voice coming from the kitchen. It wasn't my voice. It was the voice of my girlfriend. "We are here to stay," she said. "Forever." I realized that my girlfriend wasn't in the kitchen. She was lying in the bedroom, exactly where I had just left her seconds before. I was so frightened, I started trembling like a leaf. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed my girlfriend, and dragged her with me out the front door. We left in my apartment in that very moment and spent the night in my parents' house. Tomorrow, we will go back to pick up our things. I still can't understand what had happened in that apartment, but neither of us can bear to spend another night in there. Hopefully, when we pick our things up, all will be well and no one will be there.
This happened quite a few years ago when I was in college. My friends and I were living on the ground floor of an apartment, and my room was in front of the building, and outside my window was the front garden. My boyfriend and I had literally just got done playing video games. I was tired, so I put my head on the pillow and glanced to my right, which is where the window was. There was a gap between the curtain and the window, and I was met with a pair of eyes watching me. We both had the instinct to look away and quickly look back. At this point, I shouted to my ex that there was someone watching us from outside. He jumped and opened the window and shouted things at that person. He could see the grass was disturbed, so someone had been there, and by the looks, it had been more than once. From further inspection the next morning, we found out that he had jumped a small hedge and exited through my neighbor's garden. We never found out who that man was. It was Christmas and I was a freshman in high school. My family has been split up for some time, so normally we trade off Christmas Day and Christmas Eve each year. And this year, I had come home early from my grandparents' Christmas party, while everyone else was at my aunt and uncle's celebrating another party. When I was dropped off, my cousins offered to stay with me for a few hours, but I declined. I thought I could watch some of my new DVDs and get some alone time in this house, which is a rarity. I had noticed an unfamiliar car parked on the street, but didn't think anything of it, considering it was Christmas Eve. Probably a neighbor's relative or something. I hadn't been home for more than 15 minutes when there was a knock at the door. I unlocked the door and opened it only a crack to see a man standing there. Dark hair, glasses, slightly overweight and dressed casually. He didn't look like much of a threat, but my stomach dropped. He asked, "I was wondering about the car outside. Is it for sale?" I told him I don't think so. "Is there someone here I can talk to about it?" I said, quite stupidly, "No, you can come back another time." And I shut the door and turned the lock as fast as I could. He reached for the door handle immediately and started pounding on the door. I heard a string of profanities and the pounding stopped. Terrified, I was crawling on the floor to the phone, hoping he wouldn't be able to see me through one of the windows. Then I heard the noises. Our house has an open garage door, and it led through to the laundry room, where the door lock was broken and no one had bothered to fix it. Just then I heard a man yell, and I saw the man through the window run to his car and drive off. My uncle had gotten him, just in time, and he scared him away. Who knows what would have happened if he hadn't made it home in time. Sadly, we didn't get the plate number, and nothing ever came of it. But I'll never be home alone again on the holidays.
I generally try to keep my cases private, but I'm willing to share just this one because it's so noteworthy. I was working a case for this woman a few years back. She was an absolutely gorgeous lady. Youthful, slender, dark eyes and hair. A real catch. Yet despite all of that, she thought that her husband was cheating on her behind her back. I asked her what aroused her suspicions. Had she found lipstick on one of his shirt collars? And the smell of another woman's fragrance on his clothes? She said that she had no physical evidence. She just said that her husband had started acting a little off, coming home an hour or two later than usual, seeming a little colder and more distant. She figured he had taken a lover. Well, the wife had plans to stay at her parents' place that weekend, so what we decided to do was lay a trap to find out for sure. When her husband was at work, she let me into their house to place a few nanny cams and audio collecting devices around the joint. In my country, that's all above board and legal. Makes the job a lot easier than in some other places. Now let me tell you, their house was an absolute palace, and it turns out that the rich one in the relationship was her. Gorgeous and rich. I remember thinking that her husband must be an absolute moron if he was cheating on a broad like this. All the cameras were in place, and the woman leaves for her parents' place while I monitor the footage from my van outside. A couple of hours pass, and sure enough, in walks the woman's husband. This unremarkable sales type. A real suit. If a guy like this was cheating on a girl like that, he must be a real idiot. Another hour or two go by as I just watch this guy lazing around the house. Surveillance can be the worst. Sure enough though, someone eventually comes to the door. Busted, I think to myself. But it's not a woman. It's another man. Okay, now things were starting to make sense. But it's not what you think. This wasn't a lover's rendezvous. This was a business transaction. As I listen in to the conversation, it starts to become apparent what's going on. The guy at the door was a hitman. The suit wanted his wife dead, presumably so he could inherit her huge fortune. While his wife was away, this bozo was showing the would-be killer the layout of the house to make his job easier. That was their plan, to make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. The husband was going to conveniently be away from home on the night it happened. Had this woman not come to me when she did, she'd have had days, literally days, left to live. Needless to say, I contacted the police immediately. Of course, the two of them denied everything, but I had all the evidence needed to ensure they'd go down for conspiracy to commit murder. That's 2 life sentences right there, and 1 life saved. So there you have it. Those 2 arseholes are rotting in a cell somewhere. The woman got more for her money than she could have ever imagined, and when people ask what the most interesting case I ever worked was, I get to tell this story and feel like a bit of a hero.